Okay. To put this down. Good afternoon, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us from the Herbert Art Gallery in Coventry. I just introduced myself. My name is Iris Bertz. I'm Director of Birtz Associates from Birmingham, and we work with intercultural projects, and I'm also an artist and long-term admirer of Saranjit's work. So let me introduce you to Saranjit Birdi, who is the artist who's created this amazing work we're going to talk about today, which is Bomb, the Trilogy, which is absolutely astonishing, and I really invite you to come and see. So over to you, Saranjit.
Welcome, everybody. It's a really brilliant opportunity to actually showcase the work for everyone and sort of introduce it, and also the background behind it, because it's taken around 12 years to get to this point where I think it's a consolidated body of work and a stepping stone. So it's really, really a great opportunity to try and explain in some sense how it came about and what it is about in a sense. Yeah.
So I think, Saranjit, this is a great opportunity to sort of almost like color in some of the details of what's happening here in this gallery. So I'm really interested in where this original idea came from, because it's such a strong piece. It's a piece about war. It's a piece about the bombings of Coventry, Dresden and Birmingham. But where did the original idea come from, or where does it come from in your artistic practice?
Yeah, I mean, this particular project, which was anchored around the bombing of Coventry, it came about through an arts project, the Coventry Art Space set. And I'd already been working just before that on looking at the idea of capture, terrorism. There was Guantanamo Bay that was happening in the 80s, and all these issues, Islamophobia. There was, people of color being sort of sidecast, and so all these questions were going through my mind, and I'd actually explored this idea through creating a construction and then using dance and paint to express this narrative through a performance work with music and combining these forms.
And then the Coventry story was kind of gifted to you. Is that correct? I mean, you worked hard for it, but you know how sometimes life gives us a gift, commission.
I would say, yeah, it's an amazing gift. I mean, the commission just said, explore materials, do a bit of research. But because I had prototyped a large installation, it was called Capture. So in 2009, I'd created this project called Capture, where I created a 4.5 meter cube, and I stepped in and I painted a 3-dimensional painting over an hour and a half. Quite a violent painting. I was throwing paint around, smashing into the sides, and videoing it with certain CCTV, and then so I was ready when I came to the Coventry project with a large scale ambition. So rather than do a materials research, I said, can we go large? And Laura Elliott, who was part of Coventry Art Space, together we looked at spaces in Coventry. There was the gallery for Lancaster University, and also arrived at the Herbert Studio Gallery space. And as soon as we walked in, it was incredible. It's a theatre space inside an art gallery, which for my work is just unbelievable, coincidence. And as soon as I saw it, I said, well, I'm going to try and create a performance piece. And the performance pieces have installation, so it's almost like an architectonic structure. And that bears a little bit of relationship to my past even my present as an architect, and thinking about things 3-dimensionally and in terms of constructions.
I think it's interesting because we're in this theatre space now, and it is very unusual to have it's almost like they're made for you, and it gives an opportunity to, I think, to explore that. What I think is you're almost like a Renaissance man, if I may say that, because you're an architect, you paint, you dance, you do so many different things, you create soundtracks, you really sort of work the themes right through you wanted to show, rather than just buying them in. It's a real sort of process of working them through your physicality and your intellect.
Yeah, I think when I was really young, I was really interested in crossovers between the arts and how basically what happens in that creative melting pot in our insides, you know, and how things would translate. But I was also looking at how science and art collided. But I think going way back, it's related to the way my father used to. He was multimodal. You know, his written works. He was a poet and a writer, and a lot of that combined rhythm and color and physical things as well as sort of conceptual things in his writings. And I think I've just carried on that sort of aspect and the way I look at things. But I think this idea of a synthesis of different art forms, you take them apart and you bring them back and lock them into something new, was a concept that I'd come across, you know, looking at Kandinsky's work and the modernist approaches of art, this creating total works of art. I think those were the things I really locked onto, and I loved the physicality of performing, you know, that movement. If we can go back to that clip, this was part of a research project I did in 1998, where it was quite funny. I mean, this quote from Kandinsky talks about poetry, music, movement, and all these things colliding in the space of theatre. So it really brought home the connection between architecture, movement, and dance. In fact, when I went to do this research study, this is another clip of Kandinsky's drawings, which shows action and dynamics of line. And these aspects of movement really interested me, because if you have a building, there's lines of energy and force around a building. If you have a dance movement, there's lines of energy around the dance movement. And the same is in a painting. And these are all translations of energy. People like Turner and Van Gogh, they were beyond the painting, they were exploring how energy is translated. And I think all arts sort of lead to that visual dynamic. And it's totally across the board, from, especially when you're dealing with a physical body, like a dancer's body, a sculpture, or a building, there's a real language translation. But when I embarked on that research, I remember going into the tutor's office and saying, I'd really like to explore where architecture, dance, and music meet. And it was a tumbleweed moment, you know, but really, so I've been working since then on making it tangible. Yeah,
I think it's really interesting, because I think what you described there, talking about your father's work and your cultural upbringing and your cultural identity, is really important. And I think what interests me there a lot is that you referenced a lot the German expressionist movement. And of course, they really started to grow once they started to look outside of the Eurocentric focus. So, yeah, which is often forgotten, you know, people just pretend that suddenly Picasso or a lot of the expressionists just started to paint differently, but actually they looked outside of the European canon, and that's what really changed them. But of course, you have that in you. So you have this really strong identity, I think, around this Gesamtkunstwerk, which I think is the overarching one piece of work, which I think is very much a head thing, but for you, it's more like an emotional thing that gets processed through you.
Yeah, I mean, I was quite fascinated that when I was very young, that the educational system here, you started off with many subjects, then you got to your O levels, and it was 5 subjects, then to your A levels, it was 3 subjects. And then you either had to go into art or science, and then it broke it down as a degree in a tiny subject, you know. Whereas Eastern way is to think of things holistically, and it's always been that. So, you know, we had relatives and cousins who were like doctors and lawyers, but they still had an affinity. They would be musicians and painters and artists in other rights, you know, established. And so when I went on the educational system here, you know, I'd studied English literature alongside mathematics and physics because I couldn't separate the two. And the only thing that combined them as a career was architecture. Okay. So an architecture in it had art. So I didn't go down the route of pure art because, again, you know, you have to find about a career and support yourself and support others. But embedded in architecture is that thing of creating a physical piece of structure, and it has aesthetics, it has engineering, and those all those aspects, I think, are combined.
And I think that certainly is very visible in your work, that combination, also the architecture. I think this maybe could be a good point to just going back a bit to the work we're talking about here, which has taken really 12 years to come to fruition here in the Herbert today, and has gone through 3 reiterations, if that's correct. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the first iteration in the Herbert, and we can have a look at a bit of video footage, which luckily we have.
Yeah, so Bombed One was first conceptualized as an installation in which dancers were going to perform outside. There is a dialogue, and I create a structure for the dance performance. But the dancers I use are people that I've known for a long time. They are improvisational dancers. I've been part of an underground dance movement in UK since the 70s. And there was a club here called Rum Runner in Birmingham. It was just absolutely an amazing sort of place where exceptional dancers, mainly from the Black community and Asian and some white, would just really create innovative art forms. And a lot of them had a martial arts background. And this place was where they first trained in the first hour, then they performed in the second hour when the you know, people would come to the club, and then when everybody had left, then it was the proper drilling where the serious guys were just danced for the last hour and a half until absolutely exhausted. So that format has carried through in this work, the idea of battling through dance. So the dancers in the piece, first of all, they interact through a dance battle. We go into a box which is representing a battlefield as such, and they battle with paint. And then afterward, there's a narrative happens when they come out. There was, after the Second World War, there were these things called victory dances that happened, and the idea was that you pay your 2 pence, come out and you dance and enjoy the freedom from the end of the war. So dance plays a lot socially in our sort of social lives. But so I'm just parodying that in ways within the piece itself. So the piece is quite long, it's about 20 minutes, but if we see a snippet.
Shall we see a snippet, and then I'll pick you up on the dance story when we come back.
Then the bomb started to come, and it was horrendous. And my road was absolutely a bloody angry bomb. I wouldn't want to go through it again. People killed, people made.
Back. Thank you for that. So we've got Heather here in the background doing all this amazing IT work. Saranjit, I wanted to pick up on the dance because the dance is very strong here in this piece. And especially in the snippet we saw, you talked about the dancers you work with, which I think is really particular. I was lucky enough to see the piece at the time. You choose not to work with traditionally the trained dancers. And I think that's something that's noticeable. I think when you know dance, it's very much from the heart. It's from, like we like to call it, from the guts, sort of very strong, and also the martial arts connection. But I'm really interested, how did your journey with dance start?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to the 70s, really, the first contact I had with dance, which wasn't sort of social dance. We used to have a youth club in Erdington in Birmingham, and one weekend it was hired out by some Rastafarians, and so there were 4 of us that were in the club, and we were sitting down waiting for these guys to come in. Suddenly, these huge speakers came into the tiny little youth club, and they stacked the speakers up, and there was probably about 6 guys there, you know, with their hats on and their little bamboo sticks and drainpipe trousers. The music kicked off, and it was amazing that they were suddenly in this trance state, and the beats were playing, but no one was actually exact on the beat. They were just dancing around the beat, really expressive, and immediately I just got it, you know, sort of my blinkers were off and it was very open, and I just absorbed this feel, I think I would call it. And that's carried me through a lot of what triggers me as a dancer, because I think we all have triggers. Like, you would see people sitting in a nightclub and sitting there having their drinks, and suddenly one track would come and they're just like, the switch is gone and they start dancing. So we have these triggers, and for me, sort of jazz, funk, fusion, reggae, all those things were the triggers. And it's quite interesting because people, when they see me, they think, well, you play percussion, you're a dancer, it must be Bhangra related. I go, no, I don't do Bhangra, but I love Bhangra, and I do it at weddings, but in terms of a performance thing, my natural instinct is towards contemporary dance and jazz and fusion and that sort of fluidity. So the dancers I came across in my journey were people who, when the music started, they would perform. There's no pre-rehearsal, and they had an edge, a wildness, because it's not too choreographed. There's a spontaneity and a sharpness. So when I chose the dancers for these particular pieces, especially Bomb 2 in Dresden, I was very specific in the quality of the dancer and whether they would deliver on point as performers. But also I did encourage them to push their boundaries, because some of the dancers, they never had opportunities to go to stage school, appear in a film, or whatever, as traditional routes were there, were barred for a lot of us. And, you know, even going to nightclubs back in the day, you know, you couldn't get into a nightclub if you're a Black or Asian from the 70s, 80s, 90s, you know, especially on a weekend. So we had these odd days like Sunday and Monday and Wednesday, but Sunday became a really spiritual day for us, you know, dancing on a Sunday. Really, it was like going to church. It was the dance church, you know. It's just an amazing experience to have that, where everybody's welcome and there's no boundary or tribalism. In that space, everybody becomes one. So the dancers I've used are these people who could spontaneously perform.
You've worked with the same dancers for all 3 projects?
Yeah.
Apart from Dresden, we'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah, on this particular piece, we performed Bomb 1 here in this space in 2011, and there was Nini, Nehemiah Smith, Winston, Nelson, Winnie, and Christopher Foster, and I just wanted to remain loyal to the team. And each of these performers have grown in their own way, in their own lives and careers. And to come back, you know, as the Four Musketeers, I think, was a great experience. And we performed a new piece this time. But yeah, I think that loyalty was really, again, central to the work.
I think it's a great credit to you, because I think also that often people start things with their colleagues and then they feel like the work is bigger, and then they go to, can I just put the inverted commas here, bigger names, which I think all three of them, huge credit to them. I think they've really worked with you and stuck with you and sort of expressed what you wanted through their own.
And also the other thing is the creation of the music for Bombed One was quite specific, because I know that they will immediately take to that, because it's a very urban music fusion. Because all the music for all the pieces I compose digitally myself, and then some of the instrumentation I've played as well. But with this particular work, the dialogues of the historical, the testimonies of three women have been major to the work.
So we'll look at that again. I'm just going to think we should share a little bit about Dresden. But before we do this, Heather, I'm just going to put my glasses on and look at some of the comments, because I can't read them otherwise. If there's anything, if there's any questions, a really nice, I don't know if others can see this. This is from YouTube. I remember seeing this and felt it was more intense when the performers held their pose or moved very slowly. It was refreshing to see something different in an art space. I think that's absolutely spot on. I think Saranjit is one of those rare people who actually move from one space into another. He's not just a dancer or a visual artist, or he seamlessly moves between spaces. I can tell you a little personal story here. When we'd worked together on a visual arts piece many years ago, and then I re-encountered him in a dance environment, and I asked myself, is this Saranjit? Which is stupid why I asked myself this, but I said, is this Saranjit? So I went up to him because he was in a dance space. And even though I had done the same thing, I couldn't quite believe it, because it's very, very rare that people move from one world into another. So I think we need much more of this.
Yeah, I mean, it is this, for a long time I had two personas, I think. One which was in the architect's office with the tie and the briefcase and, you know, that whole professional thing. And then the other one was in the clubs. It's Sam, you know, that's my international name. It's so simple to say. And a lot of people didn't mix the two. So if they saw me in one context and suddenly saw me in another, it was like, hey, hang on, what's going on?
But I think that says much more about us than you.
Yeah.
Well, it does, because it says how small-minded and compartmentalized we are, which you really step across. I think around about 2000 was when I started to really consolidate everything and say, look, this is one thing now. The first performance piece I did in 2000 was under the Collide Commission for Black artists in Birmingham. And we had started in 2000, some of the dancers started to meet up again. And there was a whole event every Sunday at the living room bar. And so that really kicked off a sort of rejuvenation of the underground dance scene in Birmingham, which was an iconic period for us. So let's take you back to Bombed, and let's go back to Dresden. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Dresden before we have a look at Dresden. I think, as you've probably all gathered from my accent, I'm a German citizen. And of course, we've had really interesting conversations around this, because there's a lot of interesting issues to talk about: the bombing of Dresden and the bombing of Coventry. And then later on for this piece, also the bombing of Birmingham. But I think Dresden, so you managed to get the work to Dresden, which I think we're all immensely proud of and impressed by, to put it bluntly. So I'd like you to talk about, where did you show it and what was there?
Yeah, so what happened basically in Bomb 1, we had this testimony, like I said, with from Joan Edkins, who experienced the bombing of Coventry. And I was really wanting to get that across in this piece. So her dialogue featured within the musical score. Having finished Bomb 1, this is, I suppose, is a Sikh cultural trait to look at any conflict and see who the oppressor is and who is, and stand on behalf of the victim. So I wanted to see the other side of the story. I'd done Coventry, researched it, and then I just wanted to see what happened in Dresden. And it took another 7 odd years to get over to Dresden. But right to 2016, I managed to get an international travel award to go and research this. And it was really funny because when I was trying to find out information about Coventry, it took months, weeks, months. In Dresden, I contacted the maid to find someone, an artist with contacts with dancers, maybe a good film, and various venues. And in 24 hours, they sent me a whole list of 15 people I could contact. It was incredible. Just prior to going to Dresden, based in Coventry, John Yedden, who had set up the Coventry Dresden Art Exchange. Mm-hmm. So when I heard about that they were exhibiting here, I tried to do my networking bit, and I tagged on to one of their events and meal after the exhibition. So I gate crashed that and went around. Everybody said, look, I'm interested in doing a piece in Dresden. Here's my card. Come we connect. And an artist called John Kirsten, he had a background using dance in a different way. Interesting sort of meeting point. And in the end, Jean acted as my host in Dresden. Alongside John, there's Barbara Lubich, who she had a background in film and dance. So I went over to Dresden, and Barbara took me around to various venues. Jean helped me to navigate the spaces and took me around. It was just fantastic. But the turning point was when Barbara introduced me to an artist development of a huge building complex, which was an ex-munitions building, a bomb-making factory. And it was derelict. And so they were just doing bits of work. And she took me into this theatre space. It was where the Nazis showed propaganda movies. And as soon as I walked in, I thought, well, this is it. You know, it was meant to be. So came back to Birmingham, had the research done, tried to find avenues to take the project over and perform it, and couldn't find the funding to actually go and perform it. But in 2019, someone in Dresden heard about it and contacted me and asked if we could come and perform it for the festival Scene Europa after the Brexit situation. Mm-hmm. So then I took a team of 3. I took Winston and orchestrated the project over there. But I had to turn the 20-minute performance for Bomb 1 into a 40-minute performance. Interestingly, in my research period, when I stayed there, Jean Kirsten she was in her 80s. She'd also experienced the war and the Dresden Blitz. So I asked if I could have an interview with her, and she sat there and she spoke in German. I remember Jean trying to interpret her and explain English, and I said, look, don't worry about the interpretation. Let's carry this conversation, and let it just, come about. And she said some amazing things, like, the narrative about, a synagogue being burned down, and her standing there with a mug saying, when's the fire brigade going to come? And her mother saying the fire brigade's not coming. and you know, those poignant things, and she just was so honest and authentic, and it's a very powerful piece of the work, her dialogue. So Bomb 2 then stretched the dialogue of Hannah Kirsten, who experienced the Dresden Blitz, with Joan Edkins, who experienced the Coventry Blitz. And then I had to also select 3 dancers from Dresden, which was all done over emails, and looked at their backgrounds and CVs. And after looking at about 6-7 dancers, I selected
Gosh, that
3.
must have been difficult.
Yeah, and also all this stuff is about communication. This whole piece, it's like a piece of architecture. This work, it's taken a long period of time. Started with a little conceptual working drawings, did all the drawings for the set. I'm combining people, talking to the community, talking to experts, technologists. You know, it could be a structural engineer on a building, but this is a lighting engineer, and you know. So I just feel that creating this is just the same as if I was creating a building. Lots of overlapping things, but they all come together in one massive drawing. And at the center is always humanity. Yeah, always humanity, you know, and the question about how do we deal with this conflict and how we're going to get through it. So Dresden came about, you know, and I do things from, you know, learning, having the ability to draw things very quickly in sketches. So a lot of the communication to the dancers in Dresden was a sketch of the stage. You come in here, you go off here, da, 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 this is the music. So everybody had this little sketch of the whole, and and we did one rehearsal. Gosh. Performed. Even I don't believe in rehearsals. You see, I said to all the dancers, even the cameraman that's involved, or the camera person, because we've got Barbara in Dresden, is that it's going to be unpredictable, just as it would be in a fight or a war. So when you're there, you give 100%, and all the dancers did, and the performances worked that way. Everything's done instinctively, without talking. Shall we have a little look at it? Let's have a look at it. Yeah.
Then the bombs started to come, and it was horrendous.
Das kann man gar nicht beschreiben, was dort los war. 3 Stück. Wir haben gedacht, das ist schon schlimm. Aber, wo die dann mal so rüberkamen,
My brother-in-law came home, he was a prisoner of war, and my husband was a prisoner of war.
Mein Vater hat gesagt, er zeugt kein Kanonenfutter.
People killed and people maimed. I wouldn't like to go through it again.
Was ich mies fand, dass dann die Kasernen, die blieben alle stehen, ne? War alles stehen geblieben. Bloß die Innenstadt.
But you lived for that. You'd say to each other, see you tomorrow, we hope. And we meant that. We really meant that. And it did happen.
Ich bin mit meiner Mutter in die Musikschule gegangen und da brannte die Synagoge. Und nur ich als Kind, oh, da kommt die Feuerwehr. Und da sagt meine Mutter, die hat es gewusst, ne? Da kommt keine Feuerwehr.
Tech. 1, 2. Oh, we're working. Well done. Yeah. Let me just see the picture. Okay. So yeah, I mean, Dresden was such a intense experience because I had to handle all the logistics. Working with dancers who are not dedicated time-wise into the theatre world. I literally had 8 days to set up the set. When I arrived in Dresden, one day that they could arrive on plane in the night before, perform with tiny rehearsal in the morning, perform, and then the following day had to leave, and I had to engineer everything to arrive on the right plane with the right costumes, with everything, you know, and it was like trying to find wire. But what would say that arriving in Dresden at that time, they were going through a resurgence of the right wing and the sort of neo-Nazi parties, to the point where, as Black and Asian performers there, we were told not to go out into the town and engage in a conversation with people because there was quite aggressive threat out there. And I didn't take too much umbrage at that, you know, pretty casually walking around in the city. But 3 days before the performance, there was an incident 20 miles from Dresden in Halle, where someone actually broke into a synagogue. The synagogue was barricaded, but it was a racist attack and anti-Semitic attack. He then shot 2 people dead and wounded 2 people outside the synagogue, and videoed it with a camera and said he was dressed in combat gear, and put it on social media. And it was quite frightening, and we thought, shall we put this piece on? Because if word gets around, it's publicized, and there's a person from Dresden who's actually given an authentic dialogue within it. Should we be doing it? But in the end, we went ahead with it. There wasn't any incidents around the world.
I think, would you say maybe it's also reflecting back on this, which is, I think, a terrible indictment really for that history is continuing not being taught and not experienced. That hopefully your work, we're just getting a bit closer to the mic. But hopefully your work helps with actually showing what war means to civilians and what war means to individual people. I think you bringing together two individual children who were both bombed in different is really important. We're just having some issues with sound now. Can you hear me better? I think we're just going to bring the computer a bit closer.
Yeah.
Just give us a second. How is that now? Is that better?
Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure if that last bit came through, but it was quite important regarding.
Shall I talk about it again? So Saranjit was just talking about how when you were in Dresden, there was a strong resurgence of the right. So the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, was marching, and they were told I think you have to say to somebody that you can't go into the city centre. Shocking. But then also there was the attack in Halle.
Yeah, I mean the attack in Halle was chilling. But this neo-Nazi, I suppose, who dressed in combat gear, attacked a synagogue and managed to kill 2 people outside the synagogue and injure 2, and then put it on social media because he filmed everything. And it was tragic and frightening that we were actually going to put on a piece of work which had a dialogue from someone living in Dresden at the time, and we were dressed in combat gear and doing all this. It's quite an aggressive piece at times. But we decided to go ahead. Had permission from John Kirsten and his mum that it was fine to do the piece. So we went ahead with it. But also after the performance, Barbara Ludwig was really interested in how in Britain we tackled multiculturalism. And so, very rarely fly the flag for any particular group, but, we're really proud in doing in the Q&A talk saying, in Birmingham, we do have a very multicultural society, and I would big up the British society at the moment, how we've progressed over 30, 40 years, the way we fuse together, the way we support each other, compared to what, other parts of Europe are still not up to speed on that. And I think we're ahead of the game.
I think it's something to certainly protect and celebrate, because I think, like, from personal experience, also living in Birmingham, like when we are out together with friends and colleagues who are of different cultural backgrounds, look different, people don't really look. And as also German friends commented on this, how they found it incredibly relaxing. Just people aren't stared at for being of different ethnicity when they're together. And I think that's something that changes quickly when you step off a plane in a different country. I've noticed certainly. So
I think also the way this particular work functions as well is that it's almost a funnel where different cultures are pulled in actually to work together. With Bomb 2, we had cross generation. We had 26-year-old dancer, 30, 33, 40, 50, and a 60-year-old dancer. and I was the 26-year-old.
Yeah, I wasn't going to mention about that you were the youngest.
Yeah, but to bring those all together in one space, working at the same level, it was really amazing. And across the cultures, you know, from Chinese to American, German, British, it's so it's just a fantastic experience. You know?
I think
shared experience.
Really important to keep making this statement. I think you make that statement in your work very clearly. As much as it is about the realities of war and the fighting and at times aggressive, I think you also talk about the humanity. And I think, like some of the shots we just saw from Dresden, when you see the back of one of the dancers, it very much feels this very strong male, I presume it was the one we saw, but very vulnerable as well. That how that very much gets transported through the voices. And I think I had a very interesting conversation with the daughter of John Hetkin when we opened the show on Thursday. And she said to me how amazing it is that we can stand together, me as a German and she as a British person, and have this beautiful friendship together and talk about a history that was so painful for both of our nationalities. And I think that's something we really need to protect. And I don't want to say fight for, but be strong about. And I think, I don't know what you think about that, Saranjit.
I mean, yeah, the social aspects of a work like this are really important. I mean, when people come to see this piece, they'll experience, as I said, an immersion, looking at several pieces in different modes of drawing, painting, sound. Within the context of this exhibition, there's an area which shows a documentation of what we did in Dresden. And then you arrive further into the exhibition, and on one side, I might just suddenly just rotate this, you will see a collage on the wall. And it's actually longer than that. It goes quite long, but I won't turn it around. And I've called it The Wall, W-A-R-L-L. It's composed of about 200 odd drawings created by children, adults, teenagers, children who've troubled past, and also there are people with autism, and it took me about 7-8 months really to get veterans also to produce some drawings about what they think war and conflict is about and how it gets resolved. So they're quite powerful drawings, obviously in a naive language in some cases, and in some cases very, very powerful, skillful drawings. And I think it's worth a really good look at some of these when you come down, and even some of the most naivest drawings are the most powerful. So that piece is reflective of. I was very interested in voices, whether they're written, drawn, or heard, and so they come across into the space. So all these objects talk to each other through the space. Yeah,
I think it speaks of something you do. If I may jump in here, like what you do, you reach out, you're really determined to reach out, you're determined to work with people of all abilities. I've seen you in different settings, like encouraging people to draw with their feet, to take away the fear of not being good at drawing, and then people being totally amazed by what they do. You work with people who have strokes, and I think you've got that real sense of making high art, but really giving people access to it as well, which I think is very laudable and very makes your work strong.
Yeah, I think I'm a people person in that respect. I do want to connect with everybody really and get their stories. And also time is a really interesting thing, because as I said, this has taken 12 years to what I see as a conclusive point. And pieces like the one we have behind us was the sealing of the battle we had in Dresden in 2019. So I've called it Battle 2019. And on the side of it, There's another screen which is the Battle 2011. So we got the ceiling, action painted ceiling from then. And then each time, there we go, that's the one. What you see in the room beyond is actually the projection room where we're showing the dance performance that we did in Dresden. There's a small, that's the one for Battle 2011. So I've kept these for all these years with the ambition of showing them in the final exhibition. The Dresden screen was shipped over. This particular piece was just done a few months ago, and it started off with 3 dancers in the center. But then suddenly the music I was listening to was about war and battle, and this collapsing thing on fire just happened around it. So I've titled this piece, "Despite Everything Collapsing Around Us, We Continued to Dance." And I think it's featured in this piece as well.
Shall I pick you up from there, and maybe we can just zone into where we are today from Full Circle. Let's talk about it, because on Thursday we had the opening, the private view, with, I have to say, a mind-blowing performance by all of your team. So there was Phil Thompson reciting, a poet reciting poetry. He's got a beautiful Scottish voice, which I think adds another aspect to it. And here's some pictures. Heather Kincaid, who's helping us brilliantly today, she took some beautiful photographs. We then had Chris Foster
doing Bomba.
Bomba. Sorry,
So what happened before this exhibition? We had, in 2020 we were going to present Bomba 1 and 2 here. Because COVID hit, we were unable to do that. So during the period of COVID, another opportunity came up. The oldest cemetery in Birmingham had been bombed in the Second World and First World War. So I went to take a look and spoke to the project manager for the cemetery, which had a refurbishment done as a heritage park. And they said we were looking at a sound and light event for it to celebrate the refurbishment. So I had a look, and the cemetery is a huge circle. And just standing on the edge of the parapet, I thought, well, I've been from Coventry to Dresden, now landed here. And the idea of Bomb Full Circle just, came into my head. And I said, right, light and sound event, we can do that. So I put together a performance with poet and the rap, and created 2 animations. One called Blitz, which was done using drawings from art workshops with the community, listening to the bomb music, and also with a group. I do a session called Painting to Music every week, and my group, I set them a remit to do some paintings in response. So I stitched these together, created some music for an animation. Following that was the animation called Bomb Full Circle, and I've got a collection of my own sketches and drawings, alongside a narrative by Beryl, not a narrative, but a testimony by Beryl Paramore. And she's an amazing woman who was reading on radio for many years in the 90s. And she has such a clear, vivid voice and an ability to recount her experiences. And so now we've got 3 women. We've got Joan Edkins she's from Birmingham, but witnesses of Coventry, Blitz, then Hannah Kirsten from Dresden, and Beryl Paramore from Birmingham. And these are the trilogy, I suppose. But alongside that, there are other voices in Bomb Full Circle. So we might not have time to show a snippet of this. I'm not sure if we can. Would you like me to show you some of this footage? We'll go on to YouTube, yes. And if anybody...
Die Sirene, die hat uns Debüt gemacht. Große Halle, alle dort rein. Und die sind alle dann umgekommen. Oh, und das war ja laut jedes Mal mit Verschrecken. Das kann man gar nicht beschreiben, was dort los war. In Deutschland. Wir haben gedacht, das ist schon schlimm.
I paid for this. It lies where I lie, on the frosted mound I claim as mine.
Exercise freedom to seize the day. Is your level of devotion equal to the game? The cycle is vicious, we are religious. W-A-R, war.
Womb to catacomb, book-ended time. From slime to fresh air to slime. Womb to catacomb, a story do tell about times you rose and places you fell.
And Frank and my sister Lisa standing against the school wall weeping with
My husband's sister and her sister-in-law and myself. This ship, which my brother-in-law was on, had been blown up. You know, it's people disbelieve, but sometimes you've got to believe because that's what happened.
Oh, here we are.
We're back now.
Yeah, just a quick one. So each time these reiterations or iterations of Bond, as they grew over the years, I've challenged myself with either having more dancers or a much more complex setting like the event. I'd never done a light and sound event that big before, so I pushed the boundary. And then one aspect was performing poetry, because I've written poetry all the way, for many years, but to get out there and I used to hate my voice speaking poetry, but that particular piece you saw, From Womb to Catacomb, was written for that particular setting, and to recite it with the catacombs, in that space, and I'm talking to the catacombs, and having the animation with Beryl talking about people who she knew were buried in the catacombs. It was just an amazing gelling of these different, and when I talk about synthesis, I talk about these events which collide, and each piece doesn't exist on its own, but when it collides, something else happens in time, that clash. And then for this particular piece, Trilogy, I wanted to try a different medium, so we used the medium of sound, and I've created a piece called Codes, where the performers will just respond to digital sensors, and there's a construct here. Can I?
Maybe probably Heather's got.
Shall I take the pipe? No, if you see that, Heather might put up some photo
Heather can show
images.
photos.
Yeah. So that chorale, each side of it are also sculptures made of bars and mesh and red wire, and they refer to the Enigma machines, which the Germans used to code the bombing blitz. The bombing blitz was called a Moonlight Sonata, and it was only later when the decoders at Bletchley Park were able to get hold of one of those machines and try and find a way of decoding it, that they got to know what was happening. So the elements on those sculptures, each side of this wooden construction, actually refer to those machines and the computers. So when you come and see the exhibition, you will know all about that then. Yeah.
Saranjit, there's a question for you as well. Okay. Thank you, Heather, for the photographs. Sarah Lucas here is asking, is there anything you've left unsaid?
No, I think we've said most things. That the concept behind this, which I realized after 12 years, it is essentially a building of lots of parts, and they've all been assembled. There are some, I don't know if Heather, you've got a photograph of the flags behind, but those flags are from the flags themselves are from the battle in Dresden, but the battens they're on are from the earlier battle in 2011. And the idea that they're all spattered with color from one side to the other. There's a mingling, and my sort of thinking that all of us are sort of tainted with each other's colors way back, and it's only this tribalist attitude which tries to divide us historically or geographically, but the reality is the colors have been thrown over those boundaries of time and space forever. So that's what we should be focusing on.
Thank you, Saranjit. I think that's a really beautiful point to end on. We should focus on what connects us and also how we can enrich each other with our different cultural backgrounds and cultural, often in ourselves, multicultural roots, and how we can grow through connecting through others, how we can work with other expressions like you talked about, the dance. And so thank you so much about for this and talking, being so candid about your own history as well, I think, how you work with this. And I really do hope that you can come and see this exhibition, which is amazing. So I'll hand over to Saranjit for a final.
I mean, having this facility to talk to people through the internet and actually expand this exhibition, which, you know, we've got 10 days really to say to the world, you know, come and have a look. But to document it and to spread the word through these media is fantastic. And Heather's done a brilliant job, amazing job, you know. So yeah, please come and see the show. If anybody has any questions or wants to learn more about the piece, you can contact me directly through my web pages, or just Google me and you'll find Instagram, Facebook. But please do get in contact if there's other opportunities to show the exhibition, or you want to find out more about it. There's snippets on my YouTube channel. So yeah, feel free, and I hope to see you all here. The exhibition closes on 21st of November. So, you know, you've got the weekend, you've got during the week, between 10 and 4 p.m, I think, during the weekdays, and Sundays from 12 till 4 o'clock. But yeah, it'd be great to see you guys.
Is there any more events coming up as part of the...
we might do a dance-off event with a couple of colleagues on Saturday. It's not necessarily a big open event. There's very limited space here, but any opportunity I have to to dance, I lose myself in dance because I'm, you know, it started off really shy, reticent, but through dance you lose all that inhibition. It's really healthy. Yeah. Thank
you to all of you to attending, and thank you to the team at the Herbert here, and to make this happen and find this amazing restream, which hopefully worked well for you, despite apologies for our sound quality occasionally. So hopefully see you soon in the real space or again in the virtual space.
Yeah, and many thanks to everybody for dropping in. To hope to make contact in the future. Yeah.
Thank you.